The flight across, they had one little homing station in the middle of the hump, right by a place called Sally Lake. And then they had a station at India and one at Kunming. And those were the only navigational aids we had. You could take off and fly south out of Superding and go around the highest part. If you went across, straight across, you had to go to about 20,000 feet on clear days, and when the weather wasn't bad, you could see the bottom end of the Himalayas. The mountain is called Likiang, which is 26,000 feet. We had little oxygen, and you were able to do that. We hauled all kinds of things over into China. Mainly it was gasoline. And a lot of times we flew with the windows open because when you got to Kunming, the Chinese unloaded the airplane, which was a lot of times with 50-gallon drums of gasoline. And they had one of these wind-up pump things, and they weren't too careful about what slopped over. And so to be a little precautious, we tried to ventilate the airplane to keep from having a major disaster.
Thank you, Colonel Cole. So, Sid, Colonel Cole told us that a lot of the cargo being carried into China was fuel and so on. Would you perhaps tell us a little bit more about some of the challenges of carrying such vast loads over the mountains, and maybe tell us a little bit about the C-46?
Well, so many of the things like fuel was something that if you got into trouble, you could unload it. But if you had a load of pipe, that was the worst thing to carry over because you couldn't dump it off of the airplane. One night I got loaded down with ice where we couldn't maintain our altitude, and we couldn't unload the pipe either. But we finally got to a destination where we could get to a lower enough altitude where we'd be safe.
Okay, so the C-47, like the one that has just taxied past us, that was in the early days of the airlift. They later brought in the C-46. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to fly the airplane?
Oh, the C-46, wonderful airplane. Best stable airplane for being on a stall or something like that, which in training you went through, and it was a wonderful airplane to fly.
That's terrific. So, Jay, would you tell us a little bit about how the Air Transport Command basically established that air bridge that allowed us to keep our Chinese allies resupplied?
Okay, first I'd like to recognize this guy on my right. He's from the base up in the Sound Valley called Moenbury. Now, we had 4 C-46 bases in the Sound Valley, and we kind of competed with each other as to see who could haul the most. We had about the same number of airplanes flying, so who could haul the most in 1 month. So and I was from Suckerting up the valley about 30 miles from Moenbury, and our chief competitor was Moenbury. And so up on the operations, the wall up above, about 10 feet above the floor level, big sign, beat Moenbury. And right below it, we had a daily account from Moenbury and Suckerting as the tonnage that was being hauled over to see who could win at the end of the month. So I don't remember how we came out, but we always made sure that we were trying to beat Moenberry. So anyway, yeah. So anyway, of course, as early as December of 1941, right after Pearl Harbor, shortly after Pearl Harbor, the War Department was already thinking in terms of the Burma Road being a target for what they considered to be, well, it was already an invasion of down around Singapore, and they figured that the next target would be Burma. And when the Burma came up and they invaded the lower part of that, they'd cut off the supplies that were coming in from the coast, and from that point on, the only thing left on the Burma Road was what was in the pipeline at the time. So, and as the Japanese advanced further north, they cut off more and more of the opportunity to get the goods to China. So the planning in the War Department was, after much study and considering some different options, they decided the only realistic option was to use an airplane. And the terrain between Northeast India and China, Western China, was among some of the most rugged, some of the highest. As a matter of fact, it was a no man's land. No one lived up there, no one flew up there, no one bothered about going up there unless they were tiger hunting. And so it was an unknown area, but they searched around for some options and finally decided that the best option was to leave the Assam Valley of India, cross over the mountains east of the Assam Valley, and then dogleg down into Kunming. Well, of course, none of this had ever been done before. There was no type of a permanent airlift that had ever been established in the history of the military service that solely was dedicated to doing nothing but hauling supplies to keep another military operation going. And so they set a goal of trying to haul 5,000 tons a month over the hump. And they struggled quite a lot. When they first got over there with the first C-47s, they only flew daytime. They had very few nav aids. They had no weather service. They had very little maintenance available to them, no engine parts. But they did the best they could, and they started flying. Their first flights were in late May of 1942. So the purpose of it was that they figured that China should stay in the war for the purpose of possible launching an invasion from China to Japan. And another reason was that they had 24 Japanese divisions doing garrison duty and keeping control of China on the East Coast. Now, whether those 24 were fully manned, I don't know, but that's a pretty large number of troops that were tied down. As long as Chiang Kai-shek had an army and something that might be used against the Japanese, they had to keep enough force there to protect their gains. So that kept a lot of Japanese troops from going over into the Southwest Pacific, where MacArthur was island hopping, and they had to invade these Japanese controlled bases. So the tie down of these Japanese troops was one of their purposes. As long as China could be made active, the Chinese military offered a threat to the Japanese garrison troops, and so it's kept them in position. So we flew the entire war. We finally got above the 5,000. We finally got to 10,000 by the end of '43. And later, everything improved. The quality of the aircraft improved. The weather reporting improved. Our nav aids improved. So we started out with 27 airplanes and 27 crews, and we ended up
We have to pause every time for that beautiful sound.
Yeah, and we ended the war hauling 600 tons a month over the hump. So that was quite an improvement from the goal of 5,000 a month back in 1942. So the hump started a tradition. It started from scratch. They experimented. They didn't know how they were going to make this thing work. But today we are the grandfather of the Air Mobility Command that fly mostly C-5s and C-17s. was in the ATC. The ATC was a primary carrier over the Hump, and so that's why the ATC is considered the grandfather of today's modern Air Force.
Thank you, Jay. It's much appreciated. So, just give us 1 second. Smallest airplane on the airfield makes the most noise, it would seem.
I don't know how you can generate that much noise.
A lot of the supplies that were carried into China were used partially by the Chinese army that was fighting to reopen the Burma Road. Those troops in the Chinese army were deep in the jungles of Burma trying to reopen that road. They were fighting entrenched Japanese who'd had 2 years to fortify some parts of that road. Needless to say, it would have been much harder without the 27th and the supplies that were carried to them. Bob, would you tell us a little bit about carrying those supplies forward to the front lines?
Okay. Well, as he said, I was a C-47 pilot with a 27 troop carrier. I was the last replacement pilot, so I got there in December of '44. The veteran pilots of the troop carrier squadron had done the heavy work before I got there. But anyway, our drop zones were all along the Burma Road, which was the ridges we had to cross were in the 10,000, 11,000 feet mountaintops, and the foothills were 12,000 feet. So anyway, but your drop areas were in the valleys around a 3,000 foot to 4,000 foot elevation, and 500 feet above those we'd circle, and most of mine were rice drops. There was 100,000 Chinese troops involved in this campaign, and they had basically 90% of their supplies came by airdrops, and most of, like our rice, was free drops. They were not parachute drops, they were just free air drops, and they were 70-pound bags in 3 layers of burlap. I never saw one break when they hit the ground. Never saw, the Chinese would try to catch them, and luckily they never did. But at any rate, we finished that campaign. The Burma Road was open at a cost of 19,000 Chinese Army killed in action. Another 2,000 died in action, not in action, from illness. They had, and then Japanese was 15,000 killed in action. They captured none of them. Those that could get away got away. But to make a long story short, the Chinese, who the Japanese didn't think were good soldiers, turned out to be good soldiers. They had American advisors and American support from the air. So it was the first major offensive victory for the Chinese Army since 1937, when they were invaded by Japan. So it was a great moral thing, not only to get the road open, but for the Chinese to have that. It really invigorated their military force. And then from there we went and doing all kinds of things. We did all that from Yunnan, which is fairly close to the Salween River, the main part of the battle. We moved to another base right near Kunming, south of the lake, and we flew from there. We participated in a major offensive to dent a major offensive, the Japanese. Their last offensive was to capture Chikiang Airport in that area, and they kind of overran the forces there, and the Chinese moved about 5,000 at least. I don't know, we handled about 5,000 of them. There was other people hauling them. Probably put 10,000 troops into Chikiang. The Japanese offensive was stopped. Chikiang was saved. Anyway, great effort by the Chinese. And
there goes the C-47 right now.
I thought that sounded familiar. That is a great airplane. It's not as big as this one, smaller engines, but you know what? A C-47 could go for a month without much maintenance, and that was what made it so good. We didn't have that much maintenance in China. We each had a few mechanics, a few spare parts, but we didn't really, it's a good airplane.
Bob, I think there's a question a bunch of the folks out here are dying to know, and that's what's on your T-shirt.
That is, the 27th Troop Carrier was a training squadron in the States before it became a combat squadron in CBI. And they were called the Flying Taxis, and that's what this is. That's what they were. And when they got to China, and they're dropping all this rice to the troops down below, they became the, now just let me think a minute. I got my 93rd birthday is next Saturday, and I'm not sure where I am right now. No, I know where I am. Anyway.
Let's get a round of applause.
They had a parachute. The emblem they have now is a parachute with some cargo below it, and it's called a, what is it? Humpty Dumps, that's what it was, Humpty Dumps. And after that, you know, and then we were in Chikyang. I was there on detached service when the Chinese greeted the Japanese surrender force that came August 21st after the second atomic bomb. I saw them fly in, very humble. They got off the airplane. They were in their dress uniforms, Navy and Army, and they didn't look left or right. They they picked them up in jeeps, brought them to the surrender headquarters, and they signed the papers and humbly left. And anyway, one of our airplanes went up to Mukden, Manchuria, and picked up General Wainwright, brought him back to Liangshan, and then from there he went to Chungking, and then on C-54 to Battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay, and General Wainwright was there for the surrender of Japan. So it was a great thing. Oh, I want to tell one more thing. We did do I flew 74 missions, and 60 of them were rice drops. The others, we supported OSS people scattered around, some in Indochina, and we didn't know who they were. Nothing was told to us. We didn't know later that was Office of Strategic Services, OSS. So I got about 14 missions doing that, and then we started flying into Shanghai and Nanking. We hauled a lot of civilians that had been interned in Shanghai and Nanking in 1937. Some of them with wife and kids. They were there from 37 to 1945, and they survived eating cabbage soup, period. I don't know how they did it.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. It takes us to a great place to end our conversation, is with the end of the war and the impact that it had on people's families. So, folks, I'd like to get you to join with me in offering a round of applause to these incredible American heroes over here with us. Needless to say, if they hadn't been willing to offer their all, we wouldn't enjoy the freedoms that we have today. I can't speak for all of them, but I know that several of them would love to answer your questions in person if you'll come on over here and take the opportunity to interact with these fine gentlemen. Thank you. Have a pleasant day.
Sir, did he supply I know that wasn't on the I don't know why it was offer that street cabbage. I mean, that